ideeën bedacht over hoe dat wij onze patiënten nog beter kunnen helpen op manieren die we tot nu toe nog niet bedacht hadden. En we kunnen dat wel via een mailing of een nieuwsbrief rondsturen, maar dat werkt in dit geval niet. Dit is echt iets dat moet je gezien, gedaan en gevoeld hebben. En daarom dat het zo heel mooi is dat er zoveel hier zijn. En dat is eigenlijk precies hetgeen wat Thomas gaat doen. We hebben een redelijk uitgebreid programma vanavond. We gaan het zo lang rekken als dat jullie daar zelf zin in hebben, zal ik maar zeggen. Als er vragen zijn, Thomas die verstaat Nederlands ook redelijk goed, Duits, maar de voertaal zal in het Engels zijn. Maar als je dus vragen hebt, en we zijn altijd bereid om jullie te helpen met een of ander wat er ook is. We hebben er nog wel een pauze voorzien. We will have a break around 45 minutes, so if you want to go to the toilet, then that's not a problem.
Give me a sign then, because otherwise I can continue until midnight.
Yeah.
So it's better that he stops me. So.
Yeah. Okay. So then, Thomas, I will leave it.
Thank you. I will do the presentation in English actually, because it's even though I have Swedish and Dutch is quite easy for me to understand, especially because I have German as well. But my Dutch is absolutely really poor level. If you have any questions during the session, just raise your hand or just speak freely out. I usually don't like to do theoretical power presentation because it's so really boring sitting and listening to that, and I usually try to interact much more with the audience in a way. What I will do today is I will cover quite a lot of things in a very short period of time. And one of the things I was thinking about starting to look at is actually shoulder instabilities. Shoulder is a really complex kind of joint because it's actually the joint in the body where we have the highest degree of movement. And if we have any kind of instability in the shoulder, it usually also restricts the patient. So I'm an orthopedist. I'm actually on the medical committee of the Swedish Handball Federation. And the handball game, you know, has an extremely big amount of shoulder problems in a way. And this started probably 10 years ago, just before a very big playoff, where one of the surgeons called me and said, you know, I have a patient, and it's basically rotator cuff tear, and he's one of the main players in the team. I can't take him out for the playoffs, because then the whole team collapsed. So I actually told him to call you, and you'll fix the shoulder. You're one of the best shoulder surgeons we have. I should fix his shoulder. Yeah, but you always come up with these good ideas. Let's do that. So, and that's when I really went in very deeply into the biomechanics of the shoulder. And I know all of you have the medical understanding of the shoulder, but just to recapture that a little bit, we can say that the shoulder, the dynamic stability of the rotator cuff, is actually made up from the posterior part with the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. And the main function of these muscles is basically to retract the shoulder back in a posterior safe position. So, on the anterior side, we have the subscapularis, but we also have the pecs. And then we have the deltoid muscle actually doing elevation. And this very complex kind of play actually gives the muscle this really large range of motion. The thing is, when we have a traumatic shoulder injury, we have a lot of similarities also when we have a neurological patient, because the position is always usually the same. You know, the guys going to the gym and really training the precs, they are almost in a pre-positioned location for dislocation of the shoulder. And a stroke patient usually also have this anterior positioning. Very often when I have this clicking sound of the AC joint, that acromioclavicular joint, that shows very oftenly that there is actually an anterior pressure on the joint because the shoulder joint then relaxes or actually press on the AC joint. I would need a volunteer patient. So you're laughing, you come here. That's the bad thing, you know, we laugh. There. Basically, when I always assess a patient, one of the very important things to look at is the scapula bone. The scapula bone can tell me quite a lot of the position of the shoulder, because the scapula thoracic joint in this case actually slides on top of the rib cage. If we have a winged scapula, usually, that's when we have an anterior positioning, so we get the rim of the scapula. The problem is to actually retract the shoulder in a posterior safe position is not that easy. I don't know, do anyone work with kinesiotape here? Well, that's more the therapist side. So they like the tape, the pink and the blue. But anyhow, when we do that, we usually will tape with kinesio so we can actually put pressure and then retract the shoulder in order to have it more safe and also to open up the acromioclavicular joint. The problem is with kinesio tape, and if we have a stroke patient, it's not very easy for the patient to tape that. And sometimes we need a suspension in a way in order to get that posterior safe position. So what I decided to do, I decided to design a brace that is quite dynamic, but can also follow the patient in the rehabilitation. Not only traditional neurological stroke patients, but also patients, for example, with capsulitis problem, or complete dislocation of the joint. You know, sometimes we get an X-ray from the surgeon, and we have 15mm gap between the humeral head and the joint. And it's not that easy to retract that back. Usually, what we usually do, and some of my colleagues also do on the market, they make a shoulder brace and they make a cuff here, and they think that the cuff will be able to lift the shoulder up in position. Doesn't work that way. So. Also the same thing, if I would immobilize the patient here and trying to lift here, yeah, it works, but what happens with biceps? We usually get a biceps contracture if the patient can't basically elongate. So what I did was, I designed a brace that looks like this. This material here has a loop surface on the material. On the inside here, on the cuff side, I have a friction material. I can actually send one of these around on one of the sides, and you can touch and feel yourself. This is a small one. So. And the material here, on the inside, as you can see, looks like silicon. It's not silicon. This is actually TPU. It's a heat-activated TPU film that I can apply. And as you can see, what I've done on the posterior side is I've done 3 stripes. They kind of mimic the posterior retraction force of the SIT muscles. Over the deltoid muscle, I've actually made another kind of arc in a way in order to stimulate the skin, and then I have 2 more on the anterior side. Even though I have the friction layers, they are not supposed to be used directly on bare skin, unless you're a handball player and can tolerate kinesiotape. For neurological patients, I always use a t-shirt under. It's enough actually to have that suspension force. In the lower part of the arm, I actually have the skin gripping material that you can get to know a little bit more. This is the NRX material. NRX material is actually a mineral-based foam that doesn't contain any latex, no petroleum product or anything, that can actually go direct in skin applications. We're going to make a shoulder brace that the patient should be able to apply by themselves. I have chosen to make a cuff here, and that's an overlap cuff. In order for the patient to be able to slide that up on the arm, basically up like this, rest on the trapezius. Once I've applied it like this, I will use the Velcro strap, and with neurological patients we can't strap that hard, so I'm actually tightening this one quite carefully. You'll tell me if I'm actually too aggressive or not, so I think that's okay, right? Good. What I can do then, always when I've done this application, I will check that I can actually elevate the shoulder by the brace. And I think you can feel that we have some elevation force. Now I will ask you to turn the other way around. What I will do now is I will use my hand to determine the position of the shoulder. So that means I palpate over the scapula bone, and then I will stretch the material, and I usually stretch it over the scapula, and you can feel actually that you get a posterior retraction force. In biomechanics, we always have to have a counter force. The same thing when we work with a muscle, we have always an angle that is working against. So if I want to do that retraction force, I'm actually going to use the same technique as we do with scoliotic patients. I'm using the rib cage on the other side to basically compress that to get that counter force diagonally over the shoulder. And I can do that basically by a patient lifting the arm, and I will go in with the material slightly under the armpit. And if you pinch there, if you just hold it there, you can see that I'm actually having a quite good compression in the front. And that actually allows me, if you turn you around, to go up and attach it on the front side. On the front side there are two stays. Inside here there are two small metal stays. I have actually bent this one up so I can decompress the area over the acromioclavicular joint and the clavicle. Because if I have an anterior positioning, then usually the clavicle bone sticks out. And a neurological patient usually gets pressure very easily there. Is it too tight? No? If it would be too tight, then there is a small extender in the product. So if I want to extend, neurological patients can be quite large, but very short. Then I can basically just extend that and get another 10 centimeters. But that works. Now to the interesting part. That's just a very simple kind of passive brace holding the shoulder in position. Describe what you feel.
I feel pushing back.
Pushing back into posterior safe position. I think you can see now when he stands that it actually retracts him a little bit back. However, in order to get this to work with muscles, I have to use muscle facilitation. You know what that means, I assume? It's a little bit like the kinesiology technology, where we actually would start from tendon or muscle insertion and then basically run over the muscle, to compress it, and then to activate it. So, let's say, supraspinatus or infraspinatus, that are the most important posterior retraction force. What I will do, if I turn you around, I will have to turn you back and forth now, but usually what I will do, scapula ends here, midline is here, I will attach the strap like here. And what I have here in my hand is something quite unique. It's actually an elastic hook strap. And the elastic hook strap is actually developed by me. I've done this together with a German hook manufacturer who said to me that, oh, no, we don't have elastic hook. Yeah, okay, let's make it. Yeah, but you need to order big quantities. Doesn't matter. What do you want? 10,000 meters? Yeah, 10,000. Okay, let's do it. But it's a lot of money. I don't care. I want it. I need it. So, if I attach this hook now here on this side, and I stretch it out exactly like I do with kinesiotape, I run that over the scapula, exactly over supraspinatus, infraspinatus. If now I release you a little bit, you will feel. What do you feel? Explain.
Coming up on that shoulder.
Exactly. What I do is actually additional posterior, but at the same time I do lift. Exactly what we have problems with patients with a capsulitis. The patient with a frozen shoulder can usually not start at first degrees of external rotation abduction. But if we lift their arm up, then they can usually work up here. So this can be a quite good tool to do muscle facilitation. But I can also do a combination. I can also use the deltoid muscle. I apply that on trapezius, I extend the strap down, attach it there, and I release you. Describe what you feel.
My hand wants to go up.
Exactly. It feels a little bit like having an abduction cushion there actually lifting. I can do a lot of play with this, but what's important is the straps are not for the patient. They are for the technicians or the therapist to do manipulation. What I can do, let's say that we have, I don't know if you ever had a humeral instability laxing this way. It's usually very difficult usually it's basically a rotator cuff tear and they're extremely unstable in that direction. What the therapist will do when we train with these patients is that we will push the patient when the patient does extension, so we actually hold the joint in place. But what I could do, I can do the same thing here. If I attach that exactly on your humeral head, I extend that, and I tighten that up there. You feel like it's almost me standing there. And if I do this in combination with an elevation of the deltoid muscle, all of a sudden I get that pressure and stability. That tape works very good when we do these kind of small facilitations. But let's say that we have a complete dislocation. We have a 15mm gap in the joint. And I was making fun of my colleague that tries to make a cuff here and attach that up here, even though this is not really stable. How can I do this? Yeah. Then I've designed a yoke strap. It's elastic. This is the NRX material. There's a friction layer on here. It's all about biomechanics. You know, when we do an upper limb prosthesis, the weight of the prosthesis is always heavier than the real arm. It means that eventually the patient starts actually getting instability. We usually then use the other shoulder to carry that. And I can actually do the same thing. If I attach the hook directly on the opposite side, if I stretch the strap, go behind C7 so I can't pull the spinal or the cervical column anterior, I go this way, then I attach it quite low here, and I release you now, you feel that you actually get that exactly pulled force. A little bit depending on what I do. Let's say that we have a stroke patient, and the stroke patient has internal rotation, flexion in the arm, flexion in the wrist. That's a really difficult case to solve mechanically. And especially if not the shoulder is stable. What I could do here now from the beginning, before I start treating the patient, is I will go with the strap to an external rotator here, and if I release you now, you can almost see that, he actually gets external rotation of the shoulder joint, and that actually helps also external rotation in the lower arm. An external rotation on a stroke patient is inhibiting the spasticity. The problem is, what if we have a lot of patients with forced pronation that looks like this. How can we solve them into external rotation of the lower arm? Any ideas? Any split? I'll help you in this way. What I have here is actually the same material that I cut there. And what I will do, I will sand around. You distribute these on the table. These are small material samples of the material that I'm actually working with now. This is called the NRX strap. And the NRX strap was actually developed by me about 5 years ago. I was working a lot with kinesio tape and of course with braces, and I saw that there is a need for an intermediate kind of solution there. The problem with tape is when I apply the tape, it's actually gone after I take it off, and it's very difficult to get the patient to apply that. And then I came up with this idea that if I can make a skin surface friction, then I will get the proprioceptivity from the skin. As you can feel in the material, there is also compression, so I can get mechanical stability. I also have a big advantage compared to tape, because I can reuse this. If I've cut a design that patient knows, then they usually know exactly how to reapply that, and I can machine wash it. I can machine wash it in 40 degrees. The material here, as you can feel, feels like rubber. It's actually a mineral-based CR material. So there's no petroleum, there's no latex, there's no rubber inside. It's an basically a CR rubber. And CR rubber made from minerals are extremely good for skin contact. We have a lot of skin reaction tests made on the material. And so far, we've been selling the material for almost 5 years, and I've had very, very few patients with skin reactions. Let's say, external rotation on this patient. How can I do that? Yeah, I would use the CMC joint and the thenar eminence. The thenar eminence is extremely important for the proprioceptive effect. What I've done here is I have a 50 millimeter strap. They come in 30, 50, and 110 millimeter. What I can do then is I will apply the strap around the thumb, like this. Now I have a coverage of the thenar eminence, but more importantly, I have also exactly the position of the CMC, and the CMC joint is extremely good in lever arm for external rotation. Since you know our stroke patient, you have also suffering from edema. And edema is the worst thing we can have in the neurological patients because it slows down the neuromuscular function even more and can trigger more spasticity. So the easiest way here would be to just wrap with high compression up there, but then I get the same problem as I have with kinesiotape. So instead what I will do, I will position you neutral. And luckily in the lower arm here we have radius and ulna, and it's a really great rotation axis. If I neutralize you here, and I will put the strap as a circular kind of wrapping around, then I can actually block some of the rotation. If I go into the medial side now, I can lift a little bit more, go directly over the elbow crease. Why would I go over the elbow crease? Yeah, basically, that's another area that are very, very important for proprioceptivity. If I then would go up another spiral and I attach it here, I will ask you to do pronation. What happens?
Push it back.
It's pushback. It's a little bit like having a TheraBand attached onto your skin. That actually kind of gives you that muscle memory. I had a handball player with a rotator cuff tear, and after the rotator cuff tear surgery, when he was throwing the ball, he was flipping the ball, always into the right. He said, you know, I can't understand why. I feel like I've lost that kind of small sensibility. My first idea was to do a spiral on him, trying to teach him in the muscle memory to find that back. But eventually I stabilized his shoulder instead with that external rotation, and then all of a sudden we can find that fine motoric move. Let's say that you're a difficult patient. You're actually forcing yourself in pronation because of tones. What I could do then, there's another quality available called Plus, NRX Plus. The Plus one has very restricted elasticity. What I could do with this is I can reinforce my construction by basically attaching that directly here. And then following the spiral up here and attach it slightly higher there. If you now do pronation, it becomes a little bit more firm. It doesn't block you. And this is the important thing with a spastic patient. If we go in and block mechanically, we usually trigger higher tonus. So it's better to basically let the patient go more in pronation, and when spasticity decreases, then it will actually help to assist to externally rotate. Why does this work? Yeah, I don't know if you ever tried this by yourself, but if you have your lower arm and you palpate your ulna head, and you try to hold the ulna head and do pronation, you feel that we can actually do quite a lot of pronation. Usually we put a strap over our wrist support to stabilize, but it's not that efficient. Do instead this. Go your mid-center part of the radius, find that, put your thumb directly against the bone and try to pronate and see how easy it is. Not that easy. That's exactly what I do. I'm using that actual rotation point basically and involving that in the spiral. How does it feel like? No pressure or, yeah.
Does it feel pulling away?
Pulling away, but what about the skin? Do you feel compression on the skin or does it feel comfortable or? Comfortable, or? Good. What I will do is I will release you from this. I will use you for another application because you're perfectly in size for this. So, bad. You get to work today, so you can send this around and look at it. And let's say that we have a flexion contracture of biceps. This is quite common in neurological patients. Usually, in the past, I usually built some kind of cuff and a dynamic hinge that will force the patient into extension. Usually we do this together with a therapist because the therapists do manual therapy. But the problem with manual therapy is the fact that when we do extension here, the first 2-3 hours after we've done the manual therapy, usually the muscle co-contract and the patient gets stiffer. So next time when we start with the patient, we can actually feel it's actually stiffer, but eventually it gives away. So I came up with this idea, what if I can make an application that is quite easy for the therapist to apply after we've done manual therapy, to basically hold the patient more in extension to elongate the muscle. What I did then was this. Now I'm mixing a little bit of colors, as you can see. Now I have a blue one and a black one. The NRX material is available in 3 colors: burgundy, red, blue, and black. I will start with putting a cuff. I will put the cuff as an anchor just around the wrist. The further away I am from the elbow, the better, the more lever arm I get. If I don't have the brace on, I basically make an upper arm cuff the same way. Then I cut the material. This is 11 centimeter wide. I cut 2 legs, attaching hooks on each side. Now I can attach this on the back side of the brace, like this. Then I extend, you can actually hold it there. Then I extend the material over the elbow tip, attach that basically over the cuff, like this. Describe what you feel.
You feel the pushing extension.
Yeah, quite strong extension in this case. That is something that you have to adjust. Sometimes I feel that if the pull is too high here, then I usually reduce the tension. So, and I can do that luckily here. I can actually reduce it a little bit here, and now you feel it's more comfortable. In order to enhance extension, then I usually would apply a strap on the side, going over the elbow crease like this. And as you feel now, that actually makes you feel that you want to extend even further. We're using the mechanoreceptors in the elbow crease to actually get that extension. How does it feel? Strange. Yeah, strange. Imagine what the patient has to go through every day.
Sir?
Yep.
Doesn't it interfere with your
Can do that. Sometimes what I do is I actually cut an opening here. And if I do that, then I can also lose a little bit of the extension, but I can compensate that with another strap. I can use that for ulnar entrapments as well. You know, the patient that actually sleeps on their arm in the night and they wake up numb, and usually we will put some kind of product to basically prevent flexion. But the problem is they usually complain so much during the night that it blocks them too much. What I do then is I do a much shorter application, cuff, and just a slight extension. Because the interesting thing, as soon as we start sleeping, especially when we go down in REM sleep, then usually muscles relax. And it actually helps us to extend the arm. I've tried this on numerous cases, and it really works well. Because they don't like to have too bulky things when they sleep. And they want to be able to actually flex when they need it. This is the problem when we have a very firm fixation on that. If they go off during the night and, oh damn, I can't do that, and then they always complain about it. So I find this to be much more dynamic. The interesting thing with the material is we can actually cut the hole, it won't rip. It still has that kind of elongation. And I will show you that a little bit later on. You want to keep it on for the rest of the night? No, not really. So, not really. I'll get you off this one completely. So, and I'll take the cup there as well. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, yeah, he got an applause. That's fantastic. So, I think there are more people for candidates for applause than. And basically, as I said, when I developed the NRX strap, I wasn't really sure what I was after. I knew that I wanted to have that dynamic elongation in the material, but in order to do that attachment, I needed a very special kind of hook. And I developed actually a micro hook that has a velvet surface on the top, and it has a micro hook on the bottom. And this micro hook is extremely strong. You can see that if you and I will take a fight, take 1 centimeter each, you hold that and I hold that, and we'll see basically who wins that. That's a quite good tension. But the interesting part is, if you open that, you feel that it's quite easy to open. Originally, when hook and loop was developed, it was actually supposed to be attaching like that, having a shear force and being easy to open. But the cheaper and cheaper the hook has become, the more difficult it is. You know how it is sometimes we close a Velcro strap, and then the patient has a little bit of tension on that, and we should try to open it, and we almost have to have a tongue to open it. The micro hooks today are much more interesting in that case, because we don't need that big surface. Try a normal hook and loop and then tear them apart. They usually separate really quickly. So I developed this one. This one also comes in roll, but when you buy the NRX package, there are already pre-cut hooks inside there. So there's 10 or 5, depending on the width that you buy. But you can also buy it as a roll and basically cut it. If you have a clinical session where you use a lot, then it's much easier to do that. I also developed self-adhesive hook part. And the self-adhesive hook part has a very, very strong loop. This was my problem because I had a micro hook before that didn't stay on. It actually peeled off with no force. So I decided to make this much, much better. I made it transparent, so if I apply that on a thermoplastic, then the color of the hook is actually the same as the thermoplastic. 7 around 2. Don't get stuck though. And we can say that the equivalent thing to a shoulder, but in lower extremity, is the hip. And we very often have patients with internal rotation like this. That is very difficult. And if we have a neurological patient that has also an adductor contracture in this case, internal rotation, and actually hip displacement in this case, then it's quite difficult. I have a lot of patients that needs a dynamic AFO. But I usually never start with that kind of drop foot thing. I always start from the hip. Are you being our patient? No, you're too close. So. What I usually will do, if you know how difficult it is to change a gait pattern of the patient. If you're a physical therapist, that's many months of training in order to get a little bit more elasticity or flexibility over an adductor muscle. And the adductor muscle is a bit like subscapularis. It becomes short very quickly. It doesn't require a lot of days immobilized to do that. We can see that on a lot of hip patients, hip replacement patients. After the hip replacement, they usually have this problem that they have difficulty to find the foot. We have prosthetic patients, usually AK patients, where they have, especially when they go into the prosthesis first time, then they have problems to really find that. And usually we will correct that with external rotation of the foot and correction of the knee, but usually we're quite way out of the alignment curve, to be able to do that. And then we reset that eventually when patient has found that. But I found another way to do this that is quite interesting. I'll grab my pack now, get ready to get strapped in. So. What I will start with is I have an NRX material with a skin friction on it. This is an 11 centimeter. I've put the hook on the side. My first application is basically a cuff. And that cuff always have to go above the knee joint. Usually about 2 fingers above the patella. Because I don't want the quads to be pressed in on the patella side. I wrap this circular around and attach it there. Only has one function, grip. The next thing I will do, now I will apply a belt on the patient. What I'm using now is an NRX strap, but as you see, there's no friction on the inside. There's actually 2 loop surfaces on this. This is called the NRX double, and the double has a little bit more restricted elasticity. It's not as hyper-elastic as the other material. I'm using that one as an anchor belt. You can do it on top of everything. I do an anchor belt over the pelvic and close it in the front. This has also only one function, anchor, nothing else. Now I will connect these 2 cuffs, and I will do that with, once again, a double-sided one. I can also do the NRX with a skin friction, but I want to have more tension in this case. I will apply this on the medial side like this. You and I will steal the chair there. Because I want you to do now, so I want you to grab that by your hand, basically lift your heel a little bit. Now we will go external rotation on you. I will go over your buttocks in this case, and I'll attach it quite high in the back. Now you can put everything down again. Describe what you feel.
I feel a little bit
External rotation.
Yeah.
Try to walk. Walk down.
Pressure here.
Yeah, but quite a lot of external rotation, right?
Yes.
Now we'll train. So you see where I put the alignment, I put it actually mid over the sacral side. What we will do now, we don't have to offload, but I will do now an application where I stretch a little bit more. Now I go more over the buttocks and then I touch it on the opposite side. Walk again. What do you feel?
It's a strange feeling.
Strange feeling, yes?
Yes.
More external rotation, right?
Yeah, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I can do also is, if I would have a patient where I have a hip rotation, when the pelvic is actually tilted anterior here and posterior on the other side, I can actually do a compensatory attachment there. I'm using that hook that I had on the shoulder brace, but a longer one. I will attach that directly over the pelvic like this. Now I'm stretching that out like this. You can see that actually that I'm externally rotating his hip now. I attach that on the opposite side by not going completely circumferential. If you walk now, feel any difference?
A little bit like this.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It kind of gives you a torque.
Yes.
I can also do this. It's a torque, really.
Yeah, it's good.
Torque in the hips.
Yeah.
If I remove this strap, you turn around so people can see you. If I do it this way instead, I attach the strap in the mid-center there, and then I do extension over the pelvic, and I grip that basically on the front side there, and release that. Now you feel a pressure here, correct? You walk again. Sometimes we have pelvics that actually tilt anterior on both sides, and we get the lumbosacral instability. What I can actually do is, if I pull it that way, I can actually open the pelvic a little bit more on the patient. So I can play quite a lot with that. So.
No rotation, it's a little bit like this.
Exactly. So.
Yeah.
I usually start, actually, with a lot of patients with gait-related problems. I might not start with biomechanical gait correction in terms of an insole or dynamic AFO. I usually start on the hip side, and then I continue to build. Very often in the past, I always controlled hyperextension of the knee. But nowadays, unless it's a geniorectobactum kind of problem, then I usually don't correct. I check the hip, then I do my gait correction, and then I usually leave the patient there for a few weeks to test. And then it might be that I need also hyperextension support, but it sometimes becomes too much in that application. And the reason why I don't want to attack the knee that much is that it's actually a much more complex kind of structure, also from a proprioceptive standpoint.
I have a question. How do you use it? Because my patients cannot put it on themselves.
No, and actually I use it more as a therapeutic application. The external rotator you can definitely do. That's really no problem. Most patients can handle that.
Yeah.
If I would have a prosthetic socket, then I would use that self-adhesive hook. I'll put that on the socket, put a double one as a suspension belt external rotator. But these kind of reinforcement straps, they are for the technicians or the therapist to use. They are not intended for the patient.
During therapy, and then after the therapy you take them off.
Exactly. So it actually can be used as a diagnostic tool, because when it comes to hip tilt, it's very difficult for us to actually make a brace and then do a correction without actually knowing the effect. It's quite interesting to see the effect, and this can give you a kind of indication which way to go. I have had patients with extreme hip tilt, and then I do correction, and they walk even worse. So it all has to do with the compensatory locomotor system of the patient. Does it feel comfortable or uncomfortable? Or yeah, I would say that external rotator is really no problem. But what's more interesting is if I have kids. But the kids don't have a completely trained muscle memory. That's where I can use the strap, and I can use that bilateral external rotator, and then I can actually build a spiral from the foot, lower leg, all the way up to the knee to do compensation. I usually say that there's only one limitation on the NRX, and that's the fact that it's basically an upper or lower extremity application. It's very difficult to do any trunk application. Even though I have some neurological therapists working with pediatrics or with children in a way that actually even treat torticollis in a way by putting a headband and a strap system basically to control the pain. But right now, the way we have developed it is more an extremity kind of system that makes it very easy to do the first application. And it's also interesting from a cost standpoint, because by doing this, I'm not using quite many euros actually. I'm probably close to, I would say, 25, 30 euros in my application. And it's quite an interesting way to do that. The amount of tape I need to do that is definitely much more. I will release you. Take that away. Take that away. Thank you. No applause. Show another application that is quite interesting. When it comes to patients with upper limb, we very often have patients that have flexion contractures in the fingers. And we need to do an extension in this case. And very often we have to do a dynamic outrigger to reach that. But the problem with an outrigger, it's also quite bulky and it requires quite a lot of time to do that. So what I usually do here is I will make a strap as an anchor over the wrist. Then I'm cutting material with 2 holes. This application I now do for extension. But there's a very interesting application I can do for hammer toes. And then I use it for flexion instead. I'll show you that in just a few seconds. I will cut the holes so my actually fingers can fit in there, and that's important so it doesn't tighten too much. But what's quite interesting, if I have quite a little bit instability, then I can actually pull the patient into extension, attach that onto the strap, and it provides a dynamic extension of the metacarpal joint. But what's interesting is I can continue to build this. If I have a DIP or a PIP joint, then I usually just attach another loop, and I do that in front of the PIP. And then I basically can decide how much tension I need in order to get extension in that joint as well. When it comes to DIP, then usually I use kinesio tape actually. I go from nail over to PIP. But it's quite interesting. Patient can do flexion, but it will actually assist extension. It's quite a good force. It's actually sometimes even better than most dynamic extension braces. If I would have a hammer toe, then usually we know all that we have an extension of the metatarsal, and then we get flexion of the other joints. And usually we try to solve this by getting a metatarsal pad in order to actually lift. But the problem with that is that we usually don't get enough flexion on the metatarsal joint. What I could do, and I simulate this because I don't want to take off my shoes and socks and everything, but I can basically do the same thing here. What I do over the transversal arch is I actually put the strap very close, and then I can actually pull the metatarsal joint into flexion, decide basically how much tension I want, and then I attach it on there. When patient stands on the foot, metatarsal joint is flexed, and what's really interesting then is the other joints usually automatically extend, because biomechanically the toes always wants to be in full contact when we do toe off. It's a part of our balance in a way. There's another thing I can do too. I'll show you. Leave them there until I'm ready. I had several years ago a colleague of mine called me quite late and said, you know, I need your assistance. I have a bilateral radial paresis. So it's bilateral radial paresis. What happened? Car accident and humeral fracture. No. 19-year-old guy went to Greece, boozing for 2 weeks, fell asleep on the beach with his arm crossed, and woke up bilateral. And he needs urgently 2 splints. I need your support there. So we spent almost 2.5 hours doing a dynamic outrigger to work, but we chose only one hand. And when I went home that evening, I said, you know, I have to find a more functional solution for him on the other hand, because otherwise he can't handle anything with 2 dynamic outriggers. So what I did was, I went down to my workshop late at night and I started to make a drawing, and that drawing actually became what we call the Monex radial. This is actually a dorsal platform. Inside here is a low temperature thermoplastic. Because I integrated that in that CR material, I can actually take hot water from a boiling kettle, pour straight into the pocket. Takes about 1 minute to activate the material. Then it will pour it out, place it flat on a towel to absorb the moisture, and then I can go into direct skin application. What I will do then is I will apply it on the patient, apply the strap around here, and by doing that, then I can make sure that I actually get 0 degrees in the wrist, because I only want it as a dorsal blocking splint. Once it's set, takes 4 or 5 minutes, then I can continue to build on this. And what I did as the next thing is a finger platform with 2 fixed loops. Basically what I will do is I will slide 2 fingers in, and the other 2 fingers basically gets wrapped around with a strap like this. If I tighten this one close to the metacarpal joint, then I can basically lift the patient up and can do ulnar radial deviation, attach the hook on the platform, and all of a sudden I have actually an extension on the metacarpal joints. Make sure that you don't over tighten, because if I would over tighten, then I will get into a claw hand, and that doesn't help the patient. The interesting part, you know, everybody that has done dynamic outriggers, that one of the worst things to do is the thumb. Because with the outrigger, we have to have an outrigger standing out about 5 centimeters in order to have the right elevation of the strap. And that usually rides into the jacket or anything on the patient, so not very popular to do. I made a thumb piece, also in the NRX material, quite restricted elasticity. I will close that one as a thumb piece, apply that over the thumb so it covers the thenar eminence. Then I will attach the strap directly onto the platform. Then I get that extension of force on the thumb. What I could do here is I could continue to build. If I would have a patient which is actually a drop hand, not a radial paretic hand, then I can actually go in and continue to build on the PIP, for example, or even the DIP, if I want to have more dynamic extension. As soon as I have that metacarpal joint covered, then I can continue to build that. There's actually also a foam strap. And this foam strap has a double hook. This double hook sometimes I will put over the hood like this, and then I will use the foam strap to support the metacarpal joint even more if I have a really heavy hand that really hangs in orthosis. I can also use the foam strap during the night when I might not need the finger platform. Quite a simple product actually, and quite easy to do. I can probably fit radial paretic hand in 20-25 minutes roundabout, instead of spending 2.5 hours with outriggers. And the result is actually remarkably good. It doesn't work for everybody, it depends also on the patient case, of course. I'll send this around. I can send this one from here. And then I will send the straps on this side. I can play with that. We can take 5 minutes. Vet du wat even told me?
Oké, voor degenen die even een rookpauze of een andere pauze nodig hebben, neem even 5 minuten pauze. En dan over 5 minuten beginnen we.
Things by yourself. But you also have the ability to actually cut materials by yourself to try. But we will do that in the absolute end. I want to show you an interesting thing on thumbs. Because, you know, since mobile phone has entered our lives, something has happened with that one. Something very severe has happened. That hasn't happened for 50,000 years. It took us 50,000 years in evolution to develop the pinch grip. And you know how difficult the pinch grip is to distance. Just doing that takes quite a lot of my brain activity. Yeah. The problem with the mobile phone, that pinch grip is no longer, because all of a sudden we're starting to use it as a fine motor tool. When I started my medical profession 25 years ago, a typically CMC patient was a 55, 60-year-old woman, usually, with pain. The more common patients today are actually in the age between 25 and 35 with CMC problems. I worked with a surgeon and she said, you know, I have come up with a really smart evaluation to see how dominant the thumb has actually become. And I've done that by putting a code pad on the wall, a fake one. Then I will ask a patient, can you go and dial the code 1, 2, 3? She asked me, can you do that? Yeah, sure. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you're over 30. You know, of course I'm over 30, I know that. So, yeah, but you know, look at this. I'll take another patient. She's quite young. 22-year-old patient comes in. Can you dial the code 1, 2, 3? Yes, of course I can. 1, 2, 3. So you see, dominant on the thumb, resting the fingers on the side and using the thumb. So that kind of activity with the thumb actually creates much more tension on the CMC. And that is the reason why we see more and more of the CMC problem. One of the worst cases with CMC is the fact when we have a patient who walks with a crutch to offload. We have ulnar deviation. We have the crutch forcing directly over the CMC joint, and that triggers a lot of pain. We would like to put a brace on or a thumb brace, but it's impossible to grip with the crutch. If we look at the NRX strap, what I could do here is I can go around the thinner eminence, creating like a small sling, attaching that with the hook. Then I will go up with the strap, actually doing abduction in this case of the thumb. But the problem is now the base of the thumb, the CMC, and also the base of the thinner eminence is not covered. So what I will do is I will take a second turn, creating a web space in between there, and then I will go up CMC again, and now I can lift that last thing and go around. What I usually will do on a patient, what I can do now actually is when I load my thumb, it will actually help me to open up the thumb again. So I can actually have that active opposition grip, and I usually find the pain reduction position or a pain-free position. But if I have a crutch, as I said, this ulnar deviation as well, requires usually a little bit longer strap. What I do then, I have one here that is, let's send this around actually, and you can play with your own thumbs. And I can actually, in this case now, and I have another, I would say, around about 5 centimeters. If I go up around here now, then I will twist and go over on the ulnar side, and I will force the hand a little bit more into radial position, and I will do the sling directly over here. What happens with that is I can actually grip the crutch. I can't do much on the loading with the crutch on, but I can grip the crutch. But as soon as I release the crutch, and I find that opposition grip, and also the metacarpal arch, and that is quite an important position. It's not really mechanical. I can force myself into that position, but as soon as I release, then it retracts my thumb. I do this quite often when I have patients with adduction contractures, and I need to have usually a resting splint during the night to do elongation of the adduction contracture. Then I put a strap around the wrist, and I put basically a strap on the ulnar side. I will go up, fetch the thumb, and attach it, and then I get opposition in that way. It's very comfortable usually for the patient to use during the night. Send this around a little bit further down so you guys also get the chance. Can you fetch me one of the epicondylitics? Yeah. When it comes to wrists, there's a lot of applications I can do too. I've worked a lot with sports medicine, and one of the most problematic thing is when we have a wrist instability on a patient. Then usually what will happen is when I have any kind of volar splint placed in there, then it also changes the grip. The tennis player can't play with a wrist support with a volar grip. So I have to find another solution. And what I did here was basically a cutout for the thumb. I have a wider 11 centimeter, and I make 2 slits. This slit, I think you can be my patient. You're sitting actually quite close by. What I will do is I will apply this over the thumb, like this. Then I will make sure that I actually position the material on the dorsal side. I will basically go with compression and ulnar support in this case. I split it here, as you can see, so that means I can go with one strap up. Now I go over CMC, and then I attach that on the lateral side. And I go with the other one slightly higher, and do the same wraparound. What you feel now when you do extension on the wrist, that it actually slows down your extension. The problem is if we will block statically in that case, then we lose functionality as well. But what I can do here now is I can slow that extension movement down. There's another thing I can do. I can take a smaller strap with 2 hooks on each side. And this one, we hold it up like this. If I position the strap directly over the wrist joint, if I extend that there and attach it on the side, like that, if you now go extension, you feel that it actually slows you down even further. This is something that I use for gymnastics. When they go handstanding really deep, then they can get that pain, mid-carpal pain. And sometimes there's nothing found on X-ray or MRI, it's really just an inflammation because of the overstrain. That is actually something that they usually can work with also. If I would have a TFCC instability, then the DRU joint is lax. When I have that laxicity here in the way, the DRU joint is really important, the TFCC or TFC ligament in the way, because 80% of the force in the wrist goes over the ulnar bone. And if that displaces in that case, and we get that clicking, then we also lose function and especially strength in the hand. Before they will undergo surgery, because they are almost always reconstructed, I will put the strap on the inside, I will stretch it out, and I will go directly over the DRU joint. And as you can feel now, it feels like something actually helps you basically push back. I have a lot of patients that actually have this clicking. And I always try this as a first kind of attempt to see where is the instability in the movement actually functioning. For lateral epicondylitis, this is quite interesting because extension rotation actually causes the problem with epicondylitis. And I can actually use the NRX strap a little bit like I use, do you know the fascia technique or? But fascia technique is basically, we can take the muscle and then we actually change the loading insertion a little bit. You know what an epicondylitis brace have? They always have a pad here. Why is there a pad on an epicondylitis brace? Higher.
Take the tension off of the tendon.
Yeah, the tension over the insertion. Or unfortunately, there are no studies that shows that. There's no medical studies in the world that shows that a pad, static pressure over a muscle, can change the insertion. Actually, on the contrary, if we have a static pressure over a muscle that is statically loaded, then we can increase the pain. But I agree, a lot of patients feel that they get pain relief there. But I actually do this nowadays a little bit different. It started out with kinesiotape. With kinesiotape, I would usually push the fascia lateral. And by doing that, I found that a lot of patients actually get pain relief when loading. I usually always try both ways. The problem when you do this with tape is you tape lateral first, and then you ask, how does it feel? Yeah, it feels quite okay. So, okay, then I want to tape medial, but then removing all the tape and taping medial is quite troublesome to do. What I can do with the NRX is actually I will provide an anchor here around the upper arm, just secure it there. Then I'm cutting a plus application. This is the plus material with less stretch. Put the hook on one side. I will then put that over the extensor muscle, and then I can basically, as you can see now, pull the fascia lateral and attach. Take the other one, pull even further, and attach. And as you can feel, when you actually load your hand, it actually feels a little bit different on the insertion point.
Why is it two straps?
Because I like to change the angle usually a little bit depending on the patient. So sometimes I can pull one a little bit further out. depends on how the muscle belly looks like. If I have a very, very small arm, then it might be okay to just direct it one way. But I've always done that with the tape as well. I've actually cut the tape in 2 different fan techniques to pull. I usually find that the patient also have easier to do first application and then second application, basically to reinforce that one. I feel that I get more stability basically through that. So. But I think there are probably therapists doing it just with one strap as well. But I always try to make the strap as wide as I do the kind of basic foundations. How does it feel like? Oh, you don't have any like this, so you don't really know, but it feels different, yeah. And what's really important is actually the wrist. Just the tennis elbow strap by itself will not prevent anything. We have to teach the patient basically not extending and rotation. And that's the problem if you're sitting as a cashier in Mediroyal and you have this blip, 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 constantly repetitive kind of movement. That usually causes a lot of problems. You can keep it on, and whenever you want, just remove it and send it around. The last application I like to do is a lateral ankle instability. A lateral ankle or medial ankle instability, we usually use a brace on them. But a lot of braces are quite big, and they're quite difficult to fit inside a shoe. And here, I can actually try almost immediately to see where do I have my ankle instability? You know, on the lateral side, if I have a lateral sprain, I have the lateral ligament complex, but very often I also have the FTA, the fibula talare anterior involved. That's usually the people that actually have been jumping up, land on someone's foot, and then get that external rotation. Will you be my patient? You will have to jump as a kangaroo now. No, just kidding. I think I'll place you here. Hopefully everybody can. Yeah, if you take off the shoe. Which one? It doesn't matter. Up to you. What I've done here is actually I have an 11 centimeter strap. I cut the hole. This hole is for the heel. Then I make a slit, and I will show you exactly where I position the slit in order to determine that to get the maximum stability. And then I have once again a double slit here. But the reason to that is actually I want to take the lateral and the fibula talare anterior. Yes?
Better be seen on the table so that it's a little bit more visible for
Can, but I don't know if the table will stand the loading. So. I will anyhow, I will let him walk barefoot back and forth so you can see actually. What I will do here is I will take that hole and, can we try it? Yeah.
Als ik er nog op een tafel zetten, blijkbaar. Dat was nog grappig.
Feel okay? Sure. Hold here. I start from the heel, and the reason why I start from the heel is I want to have lateral compression of the lateral ligament, the fibula talare anterior. Then I will go around the medial arch in order to actually exit on the lateral side. I apply that around the heel. Is that comfortable or not too tight? What I will do next now is I will stretch the material, as you can see. If you do a little bit of dorsiflexion as well, stretch that, covering lateral ligament, FTA. And now when I go in over the medial arch, it looks like I cut it for you actually. You see that I have a slit here now, exactly where it sticks out from the lateral side. From this point, I can decide either go with this one or with this one, doesn't really matter. I usually start with the inner one, and with the inner one I will stretch that a little bit tighter, go up around the ankle, go quite high, and then I attach the strap like this. Now I have one strap left, and the good thing here is I'm very close to the metatarsal joint. I'm actually about 1 centimeter behind the metatarsal joint on fifth. You can feel that.
Yeah.
If I now lift you here and you do a little bit more dorsiflexion, if I go up around the ankle now and attach it here, then I have a quite good compression around your ankle. If you walk barefoot back and forth so people can see. Describe what you feel.
I have no idea.
No idea. Usually what we have here is a very light support. There's no mechanical really support. We have compression around the ankle. Very similar to like a normal sock we will put on. But because I'm using that plus one, now we can change the complete feeling, hopefully. What I will do then is, you see on the ending there, I put a 50mm pre-cut. That's a quite large attachment. Because I want to have a really firm attachment on that side. When I attach that on the lateral side, I will not stick the complete strap in, because I will build too much material. So I only really hook the hook part. I hook it slightly like this. There's really just a hook under the foot plate. Then what I will do is I can go then for the fibula talar anterior now. If you go dorsiflexion, now we're shortening that gap there. I will go around your ankle, directly over the FDA, and attach it behind the Achilles. I can also decide to shorten it there or go completely around. But what's interesting now I'm on the lateral side, and as you can see, when I stretch that there, then it almost mimics the lateral ligament. So if I tighten that, dorsiflexion, tighten, and then attach that there, now they're overlapping. Now they're becoming stronger. Step down. Walk a little bit. Do you feel more lateral stability now? Or
Yeah.
much more?
Yeah, a bit more, yeah.
Yeah. Depending on how tight we do this, I can actually really tweak the patient into this. I started to use this with a couple of handball clubs, where the surgeon said that we're so dependent on these ankle braces. The ankle braces are almost like, you know, like a god that we're praying, you know. Oh, I forgot my ankle brace, I can't play today. You're mechanically stable, let's go. No, I can't do that. So he said, I'd like to get rid of that dependency. What we do now in the club is that we do this kind of wrapping when it's acute, where we have an instability, but then we will train them, coordination, balance, in order to get them back. And usually what they do is they pull that reinforcement strap after a few weeks. Then there's a case to do directly. Okay. Psychological placebo as well, but there's also mechanical support as well. This is a quite interesting application because I can do that and actually yet have the patient put the shoe on, and it doesn't take that much space. Feel there's not a big difference, or?
No, almost nothing.
Yeah. It builds a little bit, of course, and that has to do that I take another turn. I can make it shorter also in that turn. I don't have to do that double turn. Oh, good. Then you can have the rest of the English. Yeah, that's fine. Have it out. Fine. What time is it? Come on. 9. Yes. Like a normal band, I would say a normal band that's usually is a passive mechanical stabilizer on the joint. What I can do here is I can first of all use that proprioception from the skin friction, but I can also tweak that to do exactly the biomechanical application. So for example, this reinforcement that I did, if I'm not satisfied with the first application when the patient walks, then I will do another adjustment, and I can kind of build that up. And it gives me a good indication on where is the instability. I have patients that are probably very satisfied with this application that doesn't need a brace, but it can also direct me what way I should use the brace. Because you know very often, we don't really know what the exact effect of the brace will be until the patient tries it. So I find this as a kind of a therapeutic and at the same time also possibility to test functionality of the patient. I have a lot of other applications, but unfortunately the time is started running out. So what do you say now, Leo? What should we do?
What I suggest that we do, so like Thomas said, in the back of the room, we have Ik zal het even in het Nederlands vertellen, dat is wel makkelijker voor jullie. Dus aan de achterkant van de ruimte we hebben een aantal handleidingen liggen van hoe dat je de bandages moet maken. Daar liggen ook al volgeknipte bandages klaar. Dus voor degenen die daar zelf een keer willen uitproberen voor de diverse problematieken, dat kan. Voor degenen die zeggen van ik wil zelf wel even een keer iets anders maken, want ik heb een idee, dat kan hier ook. Thomas zal hier zijn om jullie een beetje te helpen met wat je nodig hebt. En dan daar aan de raamzijde, voor degenen die wat meer interesse hebben in kant-en-klare producten, die liggen daar ook. Die kun je rustig een keer aandoen, voelen, proberen. En dan, ja, als die hier gedaan is, dan kunnen we teruggaan naar de kleine cafetaria, waar we straks waren. Dan kun je nog wat drinken, nog wat knabbelen, nog een beetje nababbelen. Dan zien we elkaar daar.
Wacht. Uit ervaring weet ik, mijn naam is Van Schops. Alleszins bedankt voor jullie komst. Ik wou het een beetje situeren hier, wie we zijn, waar we zijn. De meesten weten wel, ik ben altijd heel blij als ik hier zowel oudere gezichten zie, al dan niet een beetje grijs, en jongere gezichten die eigenlijk de toekomst zijn. En ik ga eigenlijk eens een beetje de woorden herhalen van Thomas. Hij verstaat Nederlands, onderschat hem niet eens weet, want hij verstaat zeker Nederlands. Ik ken Thomas sinds 1992. Ik denk dat sommigen toen nog niet geboren waren. En we hebben een hele rit. Het is eigenlijk dankzij hem. We zijn toen met ons tweetjes naar Stockholm gegaan. Daar hebben wij Bledsoe leren kennen. Gert Bledsoe, die eigenlijk een van de laatste biomechanische ingenieurs van de Bledsoe, niet bereikbraces. Maar wat ik van Thomas heb geleerd, en dat wil ik nog een beetje toelichten, is dat of je nu jong of oud bent, dit beroep, dit vak moet passie hebben. Als je denkt dat je patiënt een nummer is en je gaat daar zomaar even afwerken, dat is niet zo. Daar is een evolutie, heb ik gezien, in de orthopedietechniek. Sommigen gaan er heel snel mee in contact komen. Ik denk dat Thomas ook over de nieuwe Medical Device Directives. Wij zitten bezig ook met de BBOT, met het vak. ISO-certificatie, kwaliteitsbeheer, alles wordt allemaal heel strikter. Maar er is ook een evolutie, als u weet, dat wij momenteel, wij zijn ook de firma onder andere van de exoskeletons. De walking en die robots zijn van ons. Wij doen de upper limbs ook, dat is ook nieuw, upper limbs, lower limbs. En waarom hebben we dat gedaan? Omdat wij gemerkt hebben dat orthopedietechniek op zich, die grote groep van vroeger 25, 40 jaar, die zijn nu 45, 60 jaar. Alle andere problematieken. Dat gaat over reuma, maar vooral artrose. Als u weet dat artrose en reuma een van de grootst en snelst groeiende problematieken zijn, zelfs op jonge leeftijd, dan begrijpt u dat wij ook naar CVA-patiënten kijken, wij kijken naar reuma, wij kijken het heel breed. En ik zie ook heel veel collega's uit de orthopedietechniek ook meer en meer gaan naar die revalidatietechniek, want het is eigenlijk één pot. En daar gaat het eigenlijk om. En ik ben Thomas daar dankbaar voor, dat wij toen op Solentuna, want eigenlijk komen wij nog van de tijd van reband, rehabilitatie, bandages, dat is nu orthobok. Dus wij komen nog van die tijd. En ik heb enorm veel geleerd van de Zweedse school, die eigenlijk heel veel accent legde op de patiënt. Wat wij nu hier zien is dat wij eigenlijk het orthesevlak aan het overstijgen zijn en we gaan van orthese gecombineerd met de straps naar vestapparatuur. Wij gaan dus nu neurorevalidatieproducten combineren met straps, met orthese, met alles erbij. En daar nodig ik u hartelijk uit, want Leo wil ik een dikke pluim geven, want die jongen heeft 5 kinderen nog arm en die hebben hem 3 dagen moeten missen. Dus ik bedank Leo daar hartelijk voor. Maar wij zijn bezig niet alleen via website, maar wij gaan ook een Ortho-Medico Academy, een Neurobionics Academy. Wij gaan ook veel meer naar jullie toe komen. Wij gaan veel meer naar jullie praktijk laten doen en naar jullie kunnen spelen en kijken wat kan allemaal. Leo zelf, orthopedische technieker, ik denk dat sommigen van jullie misschien af en toe eens les hebben gehad van hem, met de BOA-sluitingen die wij ook doen. Maar alleszins, ik heb een speciale cadeau. Je moet weten dat Thomas is, behalve een goede orthopedische technieker, is het ook een zeer notoire wijnkenner. En ik dacht, ja, we zijn hier in een Bourgondisch land van bier en wijnen. En normally I give him 1 bottle, but ik zou een heel dik applaus willen geven. Ik ga 3 bottles geven.
I'm still not ready with you guys yet.
No. I want to give a small introduction because I know there are some people, perhaps they leave and so on. So shoot on and.
I can tell you that the people that stays will actually have an interesting thing on posture as well. I will do that in the last 5 minutes before we round up and take some drinks. Should we do the...
Ja, dan stel ik voor dat we eerst even voor degene zelf wat bandage willen maken, dan kunnen we dat nu doen. Laten we daar een 10 minuutjes de tijd voor nemen ongeveer, about 10 minutes. We go from scratch. En als we klaar zijn, dan gaat Thomas nog even een kleine afronding geven. Voor degenen die al willen of moeten vertrekken. Vergeet niet, we hebben hier aan de kapstokken tassen hangen. Daar zit alle informatie in over hetgeen wat we vandaag behandeld hebben onder andere. Dus ja, je mag er zeker eentje meenemen op weg naar huis.
If you want to, if you feel like you need to leave,
Dat zullen we nog via de mail doorsturen.
take the opportunity to cut a couple of samples. I can actually give you a couple of special kind of directions in depending on what kind of patients you see, and then I can actually give you the kind of most appropriate kind of application. If that's no. Good. That's